As everyone knows, there's more similarity between Islam and Judaism. And then here, God comes and introduces us to Christianity right in between those two religions. And then there's some fundamental issues that are real contradiction, like the concept of turning the other cheek. And then, in Judaism, eye for an eye, and the concept of fasting with Judaism. And then Jesus comes, it's not what you put in your body, but is what, you have to clean your mind. Not your body. That's not important. And then Islam comes again and preaches about fasting. This has made me confused a little bit.
I think that the only way in which you can really get at that is that you've really got to look at these traditions and study them comparatively. Fasting exists in all three traditions.
Right, exactly.
Particularly, it's very strong in brands of Christianity. I mean, certainly the Catholicism I was raised in.
Like eating pork, Christians eat pork.
No, but Christianity had very, very strong periods with regard to periods of fasting. So I think that I think that the kinds of similarities and differences you're talking about, while in some cases something exists in one faith and not in the other, often it does actually exist in more than one faith, but it depends on which group in that faith one talks to.
All right, I commend your how-to on how to get us to move forward, but if we take on the action that you're suggesting, which is go through these political action committees and go to the lobbying process and so on and so forth, it seems like a long-term effort in order to get to the stage that of democracy. And democracy as we know it here wiped out the state of Palestine. Democracy was implemented in Algeria. We see what happened there, genocide, and same thing now with Turkey. And I don't want to wait another 50 years to sit here and make an impact in the United States, and I am born here, and I was a Catholic, to make an impact here in the United States just to watch my family be wiped out.
Let me.
But there is a question behind that. What I want to know is, when you went to these other countries like Iran and so on and so forth, what did those leaders tell you on how to propagate Islam here and how to institutionalize Islamic infrastructure here?
Let me say that, number one, what was being cited as problems are indeed major problems. But they are not the product of democracy. They are the product of politics and of the fact that in a democratic system, you elect leaders and those leaders can make decisions. Democracy itself doesn't do that. That's number one. Number two, when it comes to Palestine, let me tell you a little story. I got into a taxi cab in San Francisco. And I knew the cab driver was Arab, didn't know whether he was Muslim, didn't know whether he was Palestinian at the time. But we drove, and he didn't say much, and we got talking, and then somehow I said something, not quite this. I didn't say something like, and speaking of Palestine, what do you think? But I somehow got him going. What I remember so tellingly was what he said to me as he pulled into the airport. And he said, as a Palestinian, he said, the people who have let us down are not just the Americans and the Israelis, but other Arabs in particular, and those are the ones that I'm the most upset with, okay, and other Muslims. So the reality of it is that indeed the United States and Europe have a role to play with regard to Palestine, a role to play with regard to Bosnia, a role to play with regard to Algeria, but there have been other players. With regard to Algeria, who is doing it to whom? Algerian Muslims doing it to Algerian Muslims. And I've been very outspoken on Algeria. And Muslims in the area not having a problem with it. The Tunisian government, in fact, plays along with it. So part of the reality that we're dealing with is that we're not only dealing with American foreign policy and European foreign policy, we're dealing with the dynamics within the region itself. And I think that this is very much an issue. And unfortunately, it's the subject of another lecture. But part of the difficulty today in the 21st century, if we're going to talk about civilizational dialogue, the civilizational dialogue is one in which often it is some of the governments in the region that are those who speak in the most militant ways to Western governments and basically say to them, not only our threat, but your threat are the fundamentalists. And so look the other way when there's repression in Algeria or Tunisia or in Egypt. And I think that it's a far more complex kind of situation. I don't think democracy is the problem there, because I'd like to put that word aside and just say political participation, from my point of view, is not a problem. Political participation means that people have a voice. The real question becomes how the dynamics of the politics within that country play out. And frankly, as most of you know, if you're talking about U.S. policy to certain countries, it's often formed by leaders in a situation in which the vast majority of the population know very little. You ask the average American about Algeria, even ask them what's going on in Algeria, and if they understand it, they don't know. So, I mean, this is really a kind of issue that goes beyond democracy. Thanks to those of you that came and that stayed.